I want to present you a new story. My daughters told me I wasn't their real father, so I stopped acting like one. They didn't expect the consequences. It all started on a normal Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished another long day at work and was looking forward to a quiet evening. The house was eerily still when I walked in. Something felt off. My wife was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes glued to her phone, and the girls were nowhere to be found. The moment I set my briefcase down, my wife looked up at me, her face tight with something I couldn't quite place. "Where are the girls?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't answer immediately, just looked down at her phone again, her fingers scrolling without purpose. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of voices, muffled, coming from the back of the house. It was strange because the back door was supposed to be locked. I walked toward the sound, thinking nothing of it at first. But as I stepped into the hallway, I caught sight of my daughters through the open door of the living room. They were sitting on the couch, their heads huddled together. I couldn't hear everything, but the words I caught made my stomach churn. "We don't even have to call him Dad anymore," one of them said. "He's not our real father. I can't believe Mom married him." The words hit me like a slap. My breath caught in my chest and I stood frozen. How could they think that? I had raised them from the moment they were born. I had been there for every scraped knee, every school play, every late-night homework session. I was their father, whether they wanted to admit it or not. I should have walked in and confronted them then, but something inside me told me to hold back. It was like a wave of confusion and hurt had crashed over me, and I needed a moment to figure out what was going on. I backed away quietly, but my heart was hammering in my chest. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The girls were distant, almost cold. They didn't look me in the eye, didn't ask about my day, didn't even talk to me unless they had to. My wife didn't bring it up either. She just sat there quietly drinking her wine, not meeting my gaze either. That night I stayed up long after everyone else had gone to bed. The words echoed in my mind. How could they think that? What had I missed? I replayed every moment, every interaction with the girls. I had always tried to do my best for them, to be present, to be the father figure they needed after their biological father had disappeared from the picture. The next morning I woke up early. My wife was still asleep, but the girls were already up, huddled over their phones at the kitchen table. The tension in the air was palpable. It wasn't like things had been before. There was a coldness between us now that hadn't been there just days ago. I needed answers. But more than that, I needed to understand why they felt this way. So I did something I never thought I would do. I asked them, "Do you two think I'm not your father?" They didn't even look up at me. One of them muttered, "You're not. You never really were." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. It was like I was hearing it in slow motion, my heart pounding with every word. They didn't even look like they cared that they were shattering me. I stood there staring at them, trying to process what had just happened. They weren't upset. They weren't crying. They weren't even angry. They had just casually dismissed everything I had ever done for them. "Well," I said, my voice tight, "if that's how you feel, then I guess I'm not going to act like a dad anymore." They didn't respond, their attention fully absorbed by whatever they were reading on their screens. I didn't know if I meant it or if it was just a gut reaction, but I said it, and the words hung in the air like an ultimatum. I turned around and left the room without waiting for a reply. For the next few days, I followed through. I stopped doing the little things I had always done for them. I didn't make breakfast. I didn't remind them of their responsibilities. I didn't ask them how their day was going or help with their homework. I just stopped. I'm not sure if they noticed at first. They had become so used to me doing everything for them that they probably didn't even realize what had changed. But soon it became apparent. The first time one of them looked at me with confusion was on the fourth morning. I was sitting at the table reading the paper when she came down, still groggy. She stood there for a few moments before asking, "Aren't you going to make breakfast?" I shrugged. "I don't know. You don't really need me to, do you?" She just blinked at me, looking more confused than angry. But the next day, she didn't ask again. By the end of the week, the atmosphere in the house had shifted. It wasn't just the girls who were uneasy. It was my wife, too. She noticed the change. She noticed I wasn't picking up the slack anymore, that I wasn't jumping to help when things went wrong. One evening she asked, "Why are you being like this? Why aren't you taking care of them?" I didn't even look up from the TV. I'm not their father anymore. They don't want me to be. So why should I pretend? Her silence spoke volumes. She didn't know how to respond. It wasn't what she had expected, but I wasn't going to apologize. Not this time. As the days went on, the girls began to show signs of discomfort. They didn't seem to understand what had happened. They didn't get why I wasn't playing the role they expected. It was like they hadn't realized how much I had done for them until it was no longer there. And that's when things started to change. It started subtly at first. A few glances exchanged between my wife and the girls, but nothing more. They'd still pass me in the hallway without a word, like I was just another piece of furniture in the house. The house had become a shell of its former self, devoid of warmth or laughter. It was a stark difference from the way things used to be, but I had my reasons for keeping my distance. They had drawn their line in the sand when they told me I wasn't their real father, and I wasn't going to cross it anymore. Then one evening, the tension finally boiled over. The girls had been particularly withdrawn that day. They ate dinner without speaking, their eyes glued to their plates as if the food had somehow become more interesting than the family sitting around the table. I could feel the unspoken words hanging in the air, like an argument waiting to happen. After dinner, one of the girls finally spoke up. "Why aren't you helping anymore?" Her voice was small, almost unsure, but there was an edge to it that I couldn't ignore. I didn't look up from my book. "You didn't want me to help." She shook her head, a frown creasing her brow. "That's not what we meant. We didn't think you just stopped being there for us. Maybe you should have thought about that before you told me I wasn't your father," I said, my voice cold. The words hit like a punch. Her face twisted in confusion, like she didn't quite understand how things had gotten this far. "But we didn't mean it like that. We were just what?" I interrupted. "You were just angry. You didn't think about how it would feel to hear that, to be dismissed like I'm just some stranger." The room went silent. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. It was like the reality of her words had finally hit her. I wasn't some stranger. I had been there for her, for both of them, when they needed a father. And now they were starting to realize it. My wife, who had been quiet up until then, spoke. "You don't have to be like this." I didn't answer her right away. I didn't know what to say. I had already given everything to this family. I had sacrificed so much of my time, my energy, my love for them. And yet, in an instant, they had turned their backs on me. "Maybe I don't have to be like this," I said finally. "But I don't want to pretend like nothing happened either. You all made it clear where I stand in this house. I'm just the guy who brings in the paycheck and fixes things around here, right?" My wife looked at me, her face softening for a moment, but I wasn't in the mood for her sympathy. I wasn't looking for an apology. I just needed them to understand what it felt like to be pushed aside. The following days were a strange mixture of tension and realization. The girls started to notice that their mother wasn't intervening anymore. She wasn't the buffer between us, wasn't trying to smooth things over like she usually did, and that seemed to hit them harder than I had expected. They were used to the comfortable routine we'd all built, one where I played the role of the father, the provider, the fixer, and now that I wasn't playing that role, everything felt off balance. My absence, my unwillingness to engage, had created a vacuum that they were struggling to fill. By the end of the week, I had already stopped doing everything I used to. I didn't make them lunch. I didn't remind them to take their vitamins. I didn't fix their broken toys or answer their questions about school. I barely even looked at them when they spoke. If they wanted a father, they could go find one. One night, I was sitting in the living room when the youngest came in, hesitating before sitting down beside me. Her eyes were downcast, her hands twisting together nervously. "Dad, can we talk?" I didn't look at her right away. "About what?" "Hi. I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean what I said. We didn't mean it. We just, I don't know. I didn't think it would hurt you." I let the silence stretch between us. I could feel the weight of her words, but part of me was still angry. I wanted to believe her, but I didn't know if I could just forgive and forget. What if she was just saying the words because it was getting uncomfortable? I turned the page of my book, pretending I hadn't heard her. You should have thought about that before. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might cry, but she didn't. She just sat there staring at the floor, her face pale and tight with regret. I could see the guilt etched into her features, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then, a voice in my head told me that this was exactly what I had wanted. This was the consequence of their actions. It wasn't until the next day that the full impact of my silence started to sink in. My wife came to me, frustration written all over her face. "You've made your point. Why are you punishing them like this?" "I'm not punishing them," I said, my voice calm, but my insides were a storm. "I'm giving them the space to figure it out. They don't get to just dismiss me and expect everything to go back to normal." She looked at me for a long time, as if searching for something in my expression. Finally, she sighed. "I think they realize what they've done, but you're making it worse. You're not being fair." I stood up, suddenly tired of the conversation. Fair? They're the ones who made this unfair in the first place. The days that followed were a blur of awkward silences, half-hearted attempts at reconciliation, and a growing sense that something was slowly breaking between us all. The girls didn't speak to me much. They didn't ask for anything, didn't even try to hide their discomfort. And for the first time, I could see how deep the divide had become. It was clear they were regretting their words. But was it too late for me to care anymore? It wasn't until the following weekend that the shift finally became undeniable. The girls who had been avoiding me like the plague for days started looking at me differently. There was a hesitance in their eyes, a recognition of the absence I had created. They had begun to feel what I had been feeling all along, disconnected, unwanted, and dismissed. It wasn't just about the words they had said anymore. It was the weight of their silence that had finally started to sink in. I had no idea how long I could keep this up. Part of me still wanted to believe that they would realize what they had lost. But another part of me wondered if this was the right way to go about it. Maybe they weren't ready to see it, or maybe they didn't see it at all. One Saturday, my wife asked me to come with her to a parent-teacher conference for the youngest. I hesitated. There was still so much unspoken between us, so much tension that neither of us knew how to navigate. I knew she was hoping that going together might smooth things over, but I didn't want to do anything that felt like pretending, like everything was okay when it wasn't. "I'll go," I said, my voice flat. We arrived at the school and the whole atmosphere felt foreign. I hadn't been to one of these in years. My daughter was sitting in her seat, her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting between her mother and me, like she was waiting for something to happen. We sat through the meeting with the teacher, talking about grades, behavior, and all the usual stuff. But it wasn't the conference that had me on edge. It was the way my daughter wouldn't look at me, the way she barely acknowledged my presence. It was as if I had become invisible. After the meeting, we stood outside the school, the autumn chill biting at our skin. My wife turned to me, her face drawn. "You need to talk to them," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I have talked," I replied, not meeting her eyes. "And they've made it pretty clear how they feel. They're not just going to figure it out on their own. You're the father. You're supposed to lead the way." I stopped in my tracks. "I'm supposed to lead the way? Really?" I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice now. "Is that what you think? Because last I checked, they were the ones who decided I wasn't their father. They were the ones who said it, not me." She didn't have an answer. Instead, she just stared at me as if she had no idea what to say anymore. The car ride home was quiet, and when we pulled into the driveway, I saw my daughter standing by the door, looking awkward and uncomfortable. It was clear they had been waiting for us. I couldn't help but feel a pang of resentment. I walked past them without saying a word, heading inside. The silence that followed was suffocating, but this time it was different. They followed me, hovering at the threshold of the living room. I didn't look up from where I was sitting, trying my hardest to maintain the distance that had started to feel like a part of me now. "Dad," the youngest said, her voice small. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer immediately, but I could feel her standing there, waiting. The air between us was so thick with regret that I almost couldn't breathe, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her. You want to talk now? I said quietly, not bothering to lift my eyes from the TV. What happened to all those times you told me I wasn't your real dad? You didn't need to talk then. The guilt on her face was unmistakable, but it didn't make me feel any better. I was tired of being the one who always had to fix things, always had to play the role of the father when they didn't seem to appreciate it. I didn't mean it, she said softly. I was just angry and confused, and I don't know why I said that. The words were sincere, but they didn't change what had happened. The damage had been done, and I wasn't sure if we could go back to what we had before. I know you didn't mean it, I replied, but it still hurts. I've been trying to understand why you said it, why you'd push me away like that after everything I've done for you. She didn't have an answer for that, and neither did her sister, who had been standing silently in the corner watching the exchange unfold. After a few moments, she spoke up. I don't know what we were thinking, Dad. I'm sorry. I really am. I looked at both of them, their faces red, their eyes wide with apology. But even as they apologized, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late. Too much had changed between us, and the rift was too deep. Sorry doesn't fix everything, I said softly. You can't just tell me I'm not your father, then expect everything to go back to normal when it's convenient for you. My words hung heavy in the air, and I saw both of them flinch. I could feel the regret radiating off them, but it didn't make me feel any better. It didn't take away the hurt. My wife entered the room then, standing in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. She knew what had happened, knew the toll it had taken on all of us, but she didn't know how to make it right either. The girls stood there for a few moments, their shoulders slumped, their faces a mix of shame and sorrow. But it wasn't the words of apology that changed everything. It was the realization that they had finally understood what it meant to lose someone. Not just me, but the idea of family itself. And I realized for the first time that they weren't the only ones who needed to figure things out. I did too. Maybe there was still a way back, but it would take more than just words. It would take time, trust, and something we had all lost along the way. Effort. I don't know where we go from here, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I need you to show me that you care, not just say it. The youngest nodded, her face pale, but there was a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. We will, she said, her voice small but steady. And in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't just about them understanding the weight of their words. It was about me understanding how far I had let this silence go. Maybe we could still fix this, but it would take all of us to make it work. And for the first time in days, I felt like there might be hope.